Welcome to Two Therapists Talking. The hope for this podcast is to talk about important issues related to couples and individuals who are struggling in their lives with many different issues. I'm David Thompson, a marriage and family therapist.
And I'm Sherie Christensen, marriage and family therapist. Please join us as we explore these issues together, and we hope you will learn and be enlightened along the way. Come find us at twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.
Hi, and welcome back to Two Therapists Talking. I'm David.
And I'm Sherie.
And today we wanted to talk about something very important to recovery, and that is the concept of addiction. What it is, how it works, why it does what it does, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised we haven't.
I was just going to say that. How have we not talked about this yet?
Yeah. This is a big one, and this is a really important one often early in the process to help, well, not only the person in addiction, but especially the spouse understand why things are happening, why it seems like they can't do things differently, almost like there's this compelling force behind their behavior. And that's important to understand brain chemistry in this process.
Right. And I think, too, a big, huge place to use this information we're going to talk about today is as a parent, right? This helps you as a parent understand what happens when your children are exposed, what happens when they might start looking regularly at porn. I mean, the numbers are so high that, you know, if you are kind of in the dark with that and thinking that this isn't going to be a big deal for you, then we need to have a chat, call us and we'll talk. So have you being able to understand this concept and then being able to convey them and teach them to your children so they understand how it works and how you can be easily sucked into this, these types of things and then have it affect you for a very long time, right, is going to be important. So this is really a topic for everybody, even if you're a grandparent, right, being able to understand this, being able to help your kids. I think it takes a lot of the shame out of it when we understand how it works, right?
Definitely.
And it helps us if we can communicate how this concept works, how this process works, to those we love and care about.
And I think it's important to understand, we talk about this, who we are separate from what we do. Yes. And understanding more about addiction, I think, can help us separate that out so that it does not feel so personal. Yes. It doesn't have to mean what it meant before, which is very easy to internalize when your partner is doing things that hurt you. But understanding the why behind it and what's happening in their head, hopefully, is going to help.
Yes. And I'm going to again pull that back to as parents, right? Because as parents, it can feel very scary to have your child come to you and talk to you about viewing something, or maybe you've caught them. You've found some pornography and some websites or whatever it is that they've used to view, and now you have to have these conversations. And parents typically will come to me being really afraid of, how in the world do I do this? I freak out a lot. I don't know how to talk about this. And so when you understand these concepts, it helps you to be more calm and more present with them and understand, okay, this is how this works. And it can be a much better space to be able to move forward with them, because your reaction is going to determine how well they are going to respond and how open they are going to be with you. Right. All of those different kinds of things, right? You freak out and the thing going on in their head is going to be, well, that's the last time that I'm ever going to do that, right?
This is not a safe place to share.
Yes. So. Which can feel hard, and it's not particularly fair, right? That right. Here, I've got to manage this perfectly. I've got to, So hopefully some of this information, we've just been talking recently a lot about, okay, how do we talk about parents and help them? That's a topic we haven't really talked a lot about. So we're definitely going to be jumping into that in the future episodes coming up. And so this is just kind of that beginning point. Let's talk first about what addiction is, so you really have a good handle on it and you have that in a way that you can communicate that with your children.
Yeah. So what is addiction? So this has everything to do with the pleasure reward circuitry in your brain, which we
Yep.
now know, and we didn't know before. It used to be just substances only. So we knew that you could be addicted to
Right.
drugs, for example. But we now know, well, lots of addictions can be formed, including process addictions, things that you do that you're not actually receiving substances into your body at all. So
Right.
this should have been kind of a no-brainer, right?
Right.
You think shopping or gaming or
Uh-huh.
gambling or exercising,
Work can
work,
be.
yep, no substances except what your brain's producing. And so
Yes.
now we know any brain reward circuitry issues can lead to addiction and addictive tendencies. And so this was really helpful information. And this has helped sexual addiction a lot too, because that was part of this why sexual addiction maybe can't be an addiction, because,
Yes, it's
well,
not a
you're not taking
substance.
anything and it's just so natural. That can't be twisted, can it?
Right. Right.
Well, video games, I don't know. That seems like a pretty simple, harmless thing. And yet we know that that is a serious issue. So,
Yeah. And to me, a lot of times I feel like these process ones can be more challenging to
yeah,
get rid of, right? Especially ones like sexual addiction, like pornography addiction, things like that, because what you're producing is not an external substance, right? It's actually natural to your body.
yeah,
It's not made to react like the natural thing in your body. It is actually just the natural chemical
yeah,
in your body.
yeah,
And you can access it whenever, right? When we're talking about recovering from a pornography addiction or lust addiction, if you want to call it that, which can have several different forms, you have access to that 24/7. You can get that hit all the time, like
yep,
anytime, right? So it becomes a lot harder to detox,
yeah,
right? You can't just stick someone in a room at a hospital where they don't have access to a drug and like, okay, you're going to be fine, right?
and the
It's
plan is to never touch that drug again.
right. It's like poof, like great. You can control that, and you can at least put them in a controlled environment for 30 days, 90 days, whatever. But with a lust addiction, you've got images, you've got your body right there that you have access to. We're talking about masturbation, things like that to have that release. It's there all the time. It's like having, it's like having vodka strapped to your, in your pocket or sitting right next to you on your desk as you're working all day every day, right? Like it's
Yeah,
it's like something that is just always there, always accessible, that you can't just click a button or throw everything away and, not have it.
yep. Oh, so what is it that drives addiction? You've probably heard of dopamine. What is dopamine? Why is dopamine so important in this process? Well, we all have dopamine in our brains, and we've all experienced dopamine because it's what makes us feel good when anything feels good. And so you think about some of the things you enjoy, playing with your dog, laughing, smiling, things that are funny. This is the brain's way of saying, hey, this is pleasurable. Do this again. Let's make it easy to do this again.
Right.
And it's a good thing. Imagine no dopamine ever, or no releases like that. And so the
Right.
brain is wonderfully made, and dopamine is probably our favorite chemical
It might
if we're
be,
going just
right?
by how it feels. But where does it go wrong in addiction?
Yeah.
And why does it go wrong in addiction? So Sherie talks about how this is like a number, and some things have lower numbers on the scale, and then some things have higher numbers on the scale. And we know this because we can actually measure it now. So
Right.
what do you mean by that?
So if we look at our brains want us to be efficient, and they want us to have this good feeling, right? So we get it from dopamine, and there's a couple other chemicals that can be involved, right? And it wants us to try to dovetail those, put those together, and see what we can come up with. So when we talk about lower numbered things, like maybe you go for a walk and maybe that gives you like a 10, and it takes you a half an hour and you get a 10 from it. Great. You go meet friends for lunch. That takes an hour and maybe it gives you a 30. You might take a bath and read a book or play with your dog or, all of these things. There's a time component. So the efficiency of receiving that, or also the things that can be involved in that efficiency level are the ease of being able to do it. If
Right.
you really love to ski, but you don't have
It's
that
a
much
lot of
money
planning
and you got to plan and, you really want to go with friends, and that becomes an efficiency issue, right? I can't just pick up and do that whenever. So you're going to be efficient, and also how much dopamine are you going to get from doing that, right?
Right.
So we all have these great menus in our brain. We've got all of these different options of things that we can do. And our brain kind of balances them out and thinks through them and decides what it wants to do based on a lot of these different things. Like, oh, I really want to go work out right now because my brain's like, ooh, this is like something I can do right now. I can just walk out the door and go for a run. And
It's easy.
Yeah, I'm going to get this much out of it, and that will feel good, and that will kind of fill me. So there's our different levels, our different numbers, and they're based on how much dopamine you're getting from it, as well as the efficiency of that activity. And then you introduce something like pornography or other substances or whatever, and these things are going to stick your dopamine. I mean, it's going to dump dopamine in your brain, like way more, right?
Right, because the pornography is connected to masturbation, orgasm, and orgasm is a chemical cocktail in your brain, unlike very few things we do. And so,
very strong.
Guess what the brain does? It registers this as something to repeat.
Yes.
Which
super high levels of dopamine and all the other amazing cocktail that gets put into that. And this is like the fastest, most efficient thing on the planet, right?
Right.
This can take seconds, literally, right?
So that creates a problem, well, with society today especially, because of how accessible it is, how easy it is.
Yes.
And we haven't even talked at all about the emotional side of this, which is why would we have a need to have these sorts of experiences?
Oh my goodness, yes.
So you imagine life without walks, or without playing with your dog, or without taking hot baths, or spending time with friends. You don't want that kind of a life. And so the brain says, hey, if I need something strong and powerful and a way to feel good, what's the fastest? What's the easiest? And once porn has been introduced and its corresponding masturbation, orgasm, this becomes like a go-to.
Yes.
And it registers like off the charts.
Yes.
Right? So this isn't a 10 or a 30 or a 50. This is like 1,000.
Yes.
And that's kind of where this problem stems from. And so you have to understand why the brain records it the way it does, why it wants it, why it tries to make it easy and go back to it. And you know what's interesting? The brain's not always doing what's best for you.
Right.
We get in this weird place with the brain where our frontal lobes, our prefrontal cortex, is our higher order thinking, reasoning. But the brain, trying to do what's easiest and what's quickest, it comes from a different place of the brain.
Yes.
And this is helpful in a lot of situations, but it's not helpful in a lot of situations. And so in addiction, it's overriding our prefrontal cortex or our frontal lobes. That's why it's not just a willpower issue, like we'll just stop it. I mean, if you loved me, you wouldn't do these things anymore.
Right.
But there's such a flood of emotion and feeling behind doing these things that it's overpowering. And that's where addiction starts to come in. And we're doing it when we don't want to do it. We're doing things we just don't want to do at all.
It causes a lot of issues.
A lot of issues.
And when we're looking at kind of this addiction scale, right? Like it's this scale, right?
Right.
And so you have a really strong addiction on the one end, and then you have maybe a less developed addiction, and then you kind of start backing down to compulsion, and then you'll notice things lower on the scale. Like I was just telling David that, when I'm under a lot of stress, little chocolate Cadbury eggs are amazing, right? And I can eat more of those than I would like to choose to, right? And this is far down on that other scale where You know, I can look at that and go, I probably shouldn't eat more of those right now. But that stress response and everything, and like, I know I'm going to feel good pretty instantly when I eat a couple of those.
Yep.
And so I literally look at the bag and go, going to do that anyway, right?
Yep. And
so when we're looking at that, there's this wide scale. And that's important because sometimes we get hung up on, well, is this an addiction? Is it a compulsion? Is it like further down the scale to the other end? It doesn't matter. This is how the brain works. And so you may be down at this end, the other end from addiction, but this is still how the brain is working, right? Yep. And recovery is the same. Like working through things is the same. It's just maybe a little easier on one end than it's going to be on the other end, right? So I just want to throw that out there because sometimes we get that, well, my pornography use isn't an addiction. It's just a compulsion, or it's a periodic usage or whatever. But your brain is working the same way. It's just what level you're at this point, right?
Right.
Because the more that you're doing this, the more that you're dumping all these chemicals into your brain, the more your brain starts to go, wow, you know what? This feels really good, but also we're getting more than we need. Like this is off the charts, right? So what do I need? I need to put in a whole bunch more dopamine receptors to accommodate that, right? And so then you put in more dopamine receptors, and so now it's trying to accommodate this flood that happens. But then on the other hand, what happens when you're not looking at porn, you're not getting the 1,000 dump, you can't get pleasure from everything else anymore.
Right.
That starts to drop off because now I don't have, like 30 doesn't do it anymore.
Right. Yep.
And that leads to, when you don't have, it leads to what David was talking about before. Like, what if you never had walks? What if you never had like connection? What if you never felt good? That's where we're ending up. You become dopamine deprived, and that is not a fun place to be. So then your brain kicks you back into, well, I know how to fix that.
Yep.
And you get into that cycle of dumping more and more dopamine and needing more and needing more. That's where we come to that concept of pornography being a progressive situation, right? Because you need stronger and stronger and more in order to not end up in that dopamine deprivation.
Which is really sad that it forms a cycle, right? And so you're depressed when you're not in this. You're maybe trying to quit, but you're not getting any kind of feel good like what the pornography would give you.
Right.
And so you feel depressed, and your brain just says, hey, we really need to do this. And it's a cycle that just turns around and around.
Yes.
Getting you to want to do that. Then you do that, but you don't want to do that. But then nothing else seems to work to make you feel good. And nothing else can compare. That's the tricky part. And recovery is almost a recognition of, okay, the way this was is unnatural. Not that you can't have really big spikes, right?
Right.
But you have to understand what's been happening and what's reasonable. And this is where your rational brain has to start coming in to kind of repair the damage that's been done.
Yes. And you have to literally go in and start and sit in some deprivation in order to start pruning those dopamine receptors back.
Right. I mean, the only thing maybe comparable is, I guess, you just quit porn, but you have lots of sex. But we don't want that to be the way to recovery either. Totally. In fact, what we want is sobriety for a while, just for dopamine levels to actually return to normal, which can happen.
And that's important for, parents of kids who are struggling with this. It's important for spouses to know, like, it's not fun. It doesn't feel good to be in dopamine deprivation.
Right.
That sobriety space. And especially if you look at people who have severe sex addiction, like really solid sex addiction, when they go off of that, when they don't have access to that, it literally feels like they're going to die.
Yeah.
And so as we're looking at that, like, that's an important concept to understand if you're on the outside going, well, just don't do it anymore, right? You don't want to do it. You say you don't want to do it. Just stop. Like, we're talking about some really serious situations in the body.
And I've actually had a lot of success making an analogy to food, and people seem to be able to understand that better. Where, we know lots of people, for example, that would like to lose weight or be more fit.
Yes.
And yet, look at how hard that process is. It's not as simple as, if you just ate healthier and you just worked out more,
right.
You don't say, really?
Yeah.
This is doing something for me, and other things aren't doing this thing for me. And so if I'm just done doing this, what do I do?
Right.
So that can be helpful too.
Yeah, some good analogies, good connections to make. So we are going to talk about this for a couple of episodes. So we're going to sign off now and come back later, and we'll have some more ways of talking about this with your kids, more ways of understanding it, and being able to apply that in your relationships and understand, okay, this is what's really going on.
And that increased understanding will absolutely help you in feeling better about you as well, which is an important part of this. So stay tuned.
All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Two Therapists Talking. We look forward to sharing more conversations with you. Connect with us at twotherapisttalking.com or email podcast@twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.